Chinese Communist Revolution, which I hope you know happened in China. In the mid-1920s, Jiang Zeji, also known as Chiang Kai-shek, took over the nationalistic party in China after the death of Sun Yat-sen, who had ruled the country for many years. China was still in a civil war. Now, the Chinese Civil War basically started before World War I, stopped for World War I so the Chinese could unite and fight in World War I, started up again after World War I, fought until the beginning of World War II, which it then stopped, and fought in World War II, and eventually it's going to start up again after World War II. So it's a very long civil war that paused twice for the First World War and the Second World War. Now, in the 1930s, a leader of the communists came forward named Mao Zedong, and he clashed with a nationalistic leader. He was a very good speaker, and he very quickly emerged as the leader of the Communist Party. After being attacked by the nationalist or Kuomintang forces in 1934, Mao, along with about 100,000 followers, began a retreat known as the Long March. They marched 6,000 miles up into the mountains of China in order to find refuge and basically kind of regroup and figure out how they're going to fight the nationalistic forces. Now, eventually, after World War II, Mao Zedong's communists are going to be victorious, and they're going to kick out the nationalist leaders. They're going to end up in Taiwan, and he is going to be take over and become the leader of now communist China. Mao was very successful for several reasons. One, he promised to give land to the peasants, which is just like what happened in Russia and Cuba. And he rejected all the traditional Confucian ideas of women's rights. Remember, in most Asian societies, women are viewed as second-hand citizens. They are not worthy of rights. They're not worthy of having a say in the family. He also used guerrilla warfare, which basically is fighting not necessarily as a controlled unit. You fight behind trees. You basically do whatever you got to do to win. Okay, so that's guerrilla warfare. Communism under Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was a very strict communist leader. He ruled China for a long time. He actually killed more people than Hitler or Stalin. He was just a lot more quieter about it. By time his rule was done in China, the historians believe he killed approximately 30 million people. So he was responsible for the death of, obviously, millions of Chinese. The Communists changed China to be known as the People's Republic of China in 1949, and they wanted to turn China into a modern industrial state. Just like we saw with the Russian Revolution with Stalin, they wanted modern industry, modern everything to be able to be a world player. Mao set up a one-party dictatorship and immediately denied people basic rights and freedoms. He also called for the collectivization of farms, forcing peasants into land and labor, and they worked for literally little or no money. In 1958, Mao launched what he called his Great Leap Forward, and the goal was to increase farm and industrial output. Now you can see here with the photos that are in these slides that Mao, just like Hitler and Stalin, was very good at using media propaganda. These posters and ads would be all over the place on the sides of buildings and in newspapers and magazines, because all the media was controlled by the government. If he didn't want it to be printed, it was not printed. And so everything basically treated Mao and his ideas like they were the greatest thing ever. He set up communes, which forced people to live and work together and hold property in common. He set production quotas. A quota is a minimum number of something you've got to make, whether it's in a factory or if it's growing, we'll say corn or wheat. You have to make a minimum number in order to earn your pay. The results of the Great Leap Forward were horrible. The goods were poorly made. The farming was not good. And this caused massive hunger and low production of an industry. People were basically starving to death. Now, in 1966, a lot of people were starting to question Mao and his ideas because so many people were suffering. This is when Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. All right, this was one of the worst plans that he had. Basically, the goal was to renew communist loyalties and to get rid of what he called the bourgeoisie tendencies. This basically was his excuse to go after anyone he felt was not loyal to him in communism. And that's what he did. And through the Cultural Revolution, he killed millions of people. He shut down all schools and factories. He ruled that education was evil. Anyone who was more educated than he was, he had killed. He had the Red Guards, which were basically student-run mini armies, and they were told. They were told by him and by his leaders, you know, to go out and attack educated people like professors, go out and attack government officials. Anyone that had some form of education, he did not want around because they were smarter than he was and they would question his policies. The results of all this death and the attacks were the economy slowed down, China closes itself off from the outside world, anything that wasn't Chinese was deemed evil, people lived in fear of being arrested, and a civil war was threatened. Now, the U.S. never publicly recognized the People's Republic of China until they backed North Korea in the Korean War. So even when all this was going on, we never considered China a communist country. We refused to give them the respect that they wanted, not until the Korean War in the 1950s. And then we had no choice but to recognize them because of the war. Here you can see and that's supposed to represent a picture of Mao Zedong as the big fat Buddha, and everyone's looking at him, wondering what he's going to do, and you can see there the man sweating in the front is supposed to represent Khrushchev, who needs China as an ally, and you have got the U.S. president, you've got Cuban and other leaders over there wondering what's going to happen. Now, communism, eventually Mao Zedong is going to die in 1976, and after him comes Deng Xiaoping took control. Now, Deng Xiaoping allowed for more economic freedom because he knew capitalism was the way to go. He did not want to lose any political power with communism, but he knew that if he wanted to make money for his country, he had to figure out a way to get the American money, which was by allowing American capitalism in very small little steps. To make China a more modern country, Deng promoted foreign trade and more contact with Western nations. He also introduced the 4 modernizations. The 4 were in farming, methods were modernized and mechanized, industry was upgraded and expanded, science and technology were promoted, and defense systems and military forces were improved. He had limited privatization of business. He got rid of Mao's unpopular communes. Deng allowed land to be leased to the farmers. Once farmers met governor food quotas, they could even keep what they had left over to sell if they wanted to. So he did have little baby steps of capitalism, but big business was still controlled by the government. Deng also welcomed in foreign technology and money. The government set up special zones where foreigners could own and operate businesses. As a result of all of Deng's reforms, they were positive. The economy grew, there was a better standard of living, and Chinese had some better foreign relations. Unfortunately, the negative part of this was the crime and corruption grew. You've probably heard of the Chinese mob, the different mafia groups, the Chinese mafia. The crime syndicates got more and more powerful, and even worse, the gap between the rich and the poor in China widened. Now, in 1989, there was Tiananmen Square. Okay, this is an event, and here you have a picture of Tiananmen Square, which is a huge tourist place in outdoor kind of park area, and this is where students fought to try to get more political reforms. In May 1998, '89, excuse me, demonstrators in Beijing occupied Tiananmen Square, demanding more rights and freedoms. It started off being students, but as the protests grew, it turned into laborers and educated businessmen. You had thousands of people on this Tiananmen Square in the capital city. Basically, they all wanted more democracy. That's what it came down to. They wanted more freedom of speech, more freedom in the media, and the government of China was not about to do this. When they refused to disperse as ordered, the government sent in tanks and troops, and it was not pretty. Thousands of Chinese were killed and wounded. This incident showed the Chinese leaders thought order was more important than political freedom. This picture here in the bottom is of the famous guy who stopped the line of Chinese tanks. The tanks tried to go around him. He stopped them. The Chinese activists and protesters were all peaceful. None of them wanted war. The Chinese army did not open fire and start killing them until darkness came. They literally turned off all the lights. You can kind of see a lamp in the bottom of the picture here. They turned off all of the lamps and the lights throughout the whole area of Tiananmen Square, so it was pitch black dark, and that's when the army started firing. That's when the soldiers came out and shooting people, beating them with billy clubs, and they even went after journalists. I remember watching this with my father. I was 10 years old, or I should say 14 years old, and watching the journalists get beat by the Chinese police because they were filming what was happening. It was a very violent, very scary undertaking. This is a cartoon you see a lot on the Regents, and you can see there's the Chinese leader, and he is spooning out into the people's bowl there for them to eat a book by Mao. And the children are asking for more Jefferson and Locke, meaning more freedom, more personal rights. And obviously in China, you're not going to get that. This is still an issue today. China has very strict internet laws, and to stop people from getting freedom on the internet, and they still want to control what people think and say and what they can get their hands on to read, because they don't want the Chinese people getting any ideas. In the 1990s, efforts were made to force China to end civil rights violation, and it was very unsuccessful. They eventually are going to get the Olympics. There was a lot of issues with the Olympics going to China because of the massive amounts of pollution in China. They have horrible air pollution there, and also for the amount of civil rights that were broken, human rights that were broken, for them to get the Olympics there. They forced thousands of people to move. They literally just took their houses. It was a very, not a good situation. In 1842, Britain had gained the island of Hong Kong in a treaty. While under British rule, it modernized and became very wealthy. Consider it like the Asian version of Las Vegas. A lot of money, a lot of business, a lot of casinos. Definitely a tourist attraction in Asia. In 1997, the treaty said that Hong Kong must be returned to China. Britain did that. China agreed not to change Hong Kong's social or economic system for 50 years and allow for a degree of self-rule. China had to do this because if they went in there and stopped Hong Kong from doing anything, all the businesses were already leaving Hong Kong because they were afraid of the Chinese government. If they did not allow them to keep doing things as business as usual, then China would have lost out on all that tax money and all of that economic power that Hong Kong has. China did, though, immediately after taking over Hong Kong, take away all freedom of press. All of the newspapers and TV stations in Hong Kong immediately were controlled by the Chinese government, along with the university. And this shows you a very modern-day cartoon, and here you have the Chinese government trying to stop. Instead of a line of tanks like that previous picture with the student, it's a line of laptops because it does not want its people to get complete and free, uncontrolled internet access. Because then they can Google and read things and see things the Chinese government does not want them to do. Google just got, 2 years ago, was asked by the Chinese government to allow Google to let them read everyone's Gmail accounts in China. Google refused, and it was a big kind of internet war between Google and China. So China still does a lot of spying on their people and a lot of controlling because they don't want freedom of press or any democratic reforms there.